Welcome in to the Fun Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller on a Monday, May 11th. Hope that you've had a great weekend and a good Mother's Day. Catch our Mother's Day podcast yesterday if you didn't. Just a little salute to all the moms and where you can find mom in your own chart. How about that? So let's talk about the big news today on Monday. Really, this happened yesterday at 11:38 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. Saturn turned retrograde. Now, I wanted to cover it today basically because obviously this is the first full day. And I wanted to do that special podcast yesterday, and for doggone sure, you don't want to mess up your Mother's Day podcast by talking about Saturn going retrograde. Okay, so we can do it on a Monday, though. That's fair game. You know, for this one, I turned to the blog that I really like reading to get perspective on things because he really studies this deeply. I'll put a link to the astrologyking.com blog on this Saturn Retrograde 2020. And I think we have some serious things to consider, both collectively and individually. So the Astrology King, Jamie Partridge, mentions this as his opening paragraph. The major influence on Saturn Retrograde 2020 is the brightest star in constellation Aquila the Eagle, called Altair. With Saturn, this star causes sorrow and disappointment, hospital treatment, an inability to work, social isolation, and depression. Sound familiar? Skipping ahead in the article just a bit, he says Saturn is the lord of karma. Retrograde motion is a time when karma is sorted out. Let's just stop right there for a second. That hit me like a ton of bricks. Because if Saturn is the lord of karma, and I don't get into the fixed stars in my astrology practice, that's where I rely on others who do for that expertise, but if this fixed star Altair is painting this picture of exactly what the whole world is going through with this coronavirus pandemic. And we know that Lord Karma is doing its work. I mean, we started talking about this early fall, at least, of last year, looking at Saturn and Pluto and going, ruh-roh, Scooby, we got a problem here. Well, as Jamie Partridge says, retrograde motion is a time when karma is sorted out. Now, obviously, people all over the world listen to this podcast, and people all over the world are experiencing this lockdown from their own nationality's perspective. So I walk on very thin ice here on where I'm going with this, but let me just play with this for just a second. So really, if we were to take this from a karmic perspective, we would have to start with the whole world. We would have to start globally and say, how have we done karmically, globally? And then you can boil it down to your country. So I would say, how has the United States done karmically? And then, of course, we can bring it down to our own lives. How have I done karmically? How have you done with your karma? And as I just stop and think about the United States, and I've been watching and observing all of the stuff of where we are. And I know this is so worldwide. And I know we want to look on the positive side. But, there's a real darkness around where we are right now. You can't avoid the shadow. These are not the best of times, as Mr. Dickens would have said. So I think about, okay, if the United States, so sorting out karma, if the United States were sorting out karma, does that mean it would have to go all the way back to the days of Christopher Columbus? I mean, literally, look at this. We're dealing with a planetary influence that last showed up in the year 1518, 1284, the time before that. Columbus came over here in the 1600s. Part of the early karma was raping, capturing, killing natives to this soil. America's founding fathers were slave owners, and they owned other human beings who have souls and astrological charts and journeys that they were on, and enslaved them, and often in horrific conditions and treatment. President Andrew Jackson tried to wipe the Native Americans off the map, dislodged them from their very sacred home ground and forced them into an area that they were alienated from along a trail of tears. And then in modern times, I've been around for 60 laps around the sun, and so I was 3 or 4 years old when JFK was shot. And I firmly believe that was kind of the opening of the gate of the great deception that we've lived under the last 60 years. I mean, those of you who live in America, would you say our government, and I'm not talking about currently, I don't get into politics here, that's not the statement. The point is our government collectively, as a whole, over the last few decades, has it been lying to you, or has it been with integrity and honesty? Do you believe the party lines of what you're hearing these days? Do you even know who to listen to these days? That's all karma. And what Jamie Partridge is saying here is that Saturn is going to go into retrograde to sit down, stop, slow down, and deal with karma. That kind of bothers me. Doesn't it bother you? It's like, whoa. So maybe we can personalize this and say, what have you been doing with your karma, and are you on your spiritual path? And one of the things that I said from the very, very beginning, and I would reiterate that here, is that Saturn and Pluto was going to cause us to sit down and deal with exactly this very thing. Where are we on the spiritual path? Pluto is already in retrograde. Pluto is the planet of transformation. Saturn was the planet, or is the planet, of karma. We were putting those together spoofingly and calling them the Blues Brothers of karma. Saturn comes in and says, we are going to square up to the plumb line. Pluto comes in and says, I'm going to knock everything out and rebuild according to the plumb line. And our duty in that is how much we're resisting that process. Because if we're complying with the process, we have two very powerful allies on our side. Everybody thinks Mars is the big power planet. Man, you ain't seen nothing until you get in with Pluto. Just have to make sure you're on the right side of it. So I think we take two approaches to this. Number one, as far as the big macro, as we just observe through that lens, let's look at it and watch collectively over the next 4.5 months for clues of global and national karma being resolved. This may come in the form of newsworthy items. It may not. But there is a lot of stuff in the world and in individual countries that has not been resolved properly. I scratch my chin. No, I don't scratch my chin. I did wash my hands. I ponder. I ponder with my brow furrowed. Let's put it that way. I furrow my brow and ponder whether this particular season might be for that to be dealt with. I don't know. Observe. But what I do have control over is my own self. So now with these two karmic blues brothers in retrograde, it's time to get busy on number one. So what I'm going to do is everything that I was talking about and doing in the fall and leading into this now just went into overdrive as far as really amping up and ramping up my own internal spiritual work, taking care of any loose ends that come up, making sure that I am completely in integrity, and resolving karma, going in and asking these two super warriors, Saturn and Pluto, to reveal areas that need to be opened up and dealt with, but to do it gently. I mean, look, they're in retrograde. They're passive right now. It's like, just make it easy. Let it come to mind. I'm not going to resist. I'm going to do the work. That's my game plan. And then just observe the rest, because that we cannot control. Hope that helps. Wow, Saturn Retrograde.